We are on the precipice of a major course correction in January of 2025. In my last video, I talked about Pluto being in Aquarius for the next 20 years, cementing us into this Aquarian age. Which future will we co-create, a more utopian or dystopian one? Well, that depends on each individual's actions, moment by moment, amongst the collective, as we choose together which timeline we want to be on. And in January of 2025, it really is a critical month for us because we have major events happening at the same time. We have the Mars-Pluto opposition hitting its crescendo, and then we also have the Jupiter-Saturn square. My name is Bryan Colter. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and here's my take on what's going on in the sky. I'm filming this on December 27th. The picture you're seeing on the screen here is the 30th, when we have the Capricorn new moon. We definitely want to talk about that. But I'm going to be spending most of my time talking about the two big headliners, especially for the first couple weeks of January, which is the Mars-Pluto opposition and the Saturn-Jupiter square. Let's start with the Pluto-Mars opposition. A couple months ago, when this event started, I went into great detail about it. So I'm not going to fully launch into the evolutionary meaning of this event. If you're interested in having a deeper understanding of it, I will put a link at the end of this video, and you can check that out. But the pistachio nutshell version is both of these planets, although they're very different, what they have in common is a quality of intensity. Mars is known as the god of war. It's a very active, dynamic, sometimes volatile planet. It can be aggressive. It can also be quite brave, courageous, and full of willpower. It's a planet that has a lot of tenacity to it. Meanwhile, Pluto, archetypally known as the god of hell or the lord of the underworld, also has intensity to it, but it's more psychological in nature because it has a reference to our own woundedness, our traumas on an individual level, as well as on a collective level. So intensity is the uncontested key word here. A volatility, an explosiveness. And this event is at absolute peak right now because they hit the exact opposition on January 2nd or 3rd, depending on what time zone you're in. So, right now, we're certainly feeling it very strong. And into the first, 7 to 10 days of January, it's really, really going to be strong. And then it'll slowly start to fade. It'll still be active all the way until practically May. But we're at this peak moment now. And the way I read this is the world, the collective, this is a generalization here, but above what will be considered average or normal, is really at the edge of their seats in the most psychologically intense form of anticipation. There's many people who are feeling strong, intense excitement with anticipation. Some are feeling a lot of nervousness. Some are feeling some dread. It really depends upon each individual's perception of reality, how they perceive the world, how they perceive what's going on. Are they perceiving things more negatively or positively? Of course, that will influence their emotional state connected to this intense anticipation. But regardless of the emotional state, what they all have in common is that Marshall-Plutonian intensity, the sense that people feel like something big is happening, that this is a very important year for humanity. This is a very important start of this year for humanity, waiting for what's to come. Now, Mars doesn't really like waiting, doesn't like being one to be passive, let's say. Passive anticipation is not the greatest strategy during a big Mars event. Mars thrives in action. And actually, the planet Mars rules the sign of Aries, and we have the north node of the moon in Aries. So actually, we as a collective have a lot to learn through action right now. And passivity, therefore, has a more stultifying effect on our growth during this time. An important follow-up question is, which actions should we take? Because that's very vague. Well, To get a deeper understanding, we want to look to the other planetary events that are happening at the same time, namely Saturn squared Jupiter. Now, what Saturn and Jupiter have in common is they're the two biggest bodies in the solar system, besides the sun. So every once in a while, these two big baddies will interact with each other in the sky through some kind of aspect. And in some ways, these planets are seen as opposite. Jupiter is known as the greater benefic. Saturn is known as the greater malefic. Jupiter is known as the planet of expansion. Saturn is known as the planet of contraction. So they are very much yin-yang in a lot of ways. Jupiter tends to have a more buoyant energy. Saturn tends to be a little bit more weightier or heavy or oppressive. Jupiter kind of likes to speed things up. There's an expansive energy. Saturn likes to slow things down. And just because their energies are quite opposite in a lot of ways, it's not like when they interact in the sky, they kind of cancel each other out. The art form in this is, how can I work with Saturn in Pisces square Jupiter in Gemini in a more integrative, holistic way? We can work with any of these symbols in different ways. They all represent a spectrum of possibilities. Jupiter at the high end, it's the planet of hope and faith and optimism, hoping for a better future, for example, and expanding towards that future. Kind of has that you can do it energy. And if we work with Jupiter through the evolutionary lens, I do call it the faith builder. A good evolutionary question to ask yourself during any Jupiter event is, how am I underestimating myself? It's also the planet of victories. How can I create a victory for myself? How can I create a victory for humanity as we're on the precipice of something major? These are useful questions to contemplate during this time. Saturn, on the other hand, is a much more challenging energy, a little less encouraging, inviting us to kind of pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and keep on trucking and do what's difficult and commit to something, sink our teeth into something. Saturn represents our capacity to do things that we don't feel like doing. So with a heavy Saturn event in combination with a big Mars event, procrastination will not be rewarded now. Jupiter, on the other hand, is encouragingly whispering into humanity's ear, saying, hey, you can do this. Have faith for a better future. Lift up your consciousness and co-create something beautiful, something miraculous. Here, Jupiter is in the sign of Gemini, the sign of information and truth. Align oneself with truth through a clearer perception of reality so that you can expand and bump onto this more utopian timeline. Saturn, its response is, oh yeah, prove it. You have to be willing to put in the great effort, the blood, sweat, and tears to accomplish this great work of this more utopian timeline. Here's the metaphor for a healthy integration between Saturn and Jupiter. Imagine you have a best friend. She's 39 years old. She has a very successful career. She's married and they have no kids. And she's 39. They're really wrestling with this question. Do we want to have kids or not? And they decide, yes, we do. And they give it a go. And it works out. They have a beautiful, healthy baby girl. We fast forward in our story about 5 or 6 years. There you are with your best friend on the park bench. The kid is playing on the jungle gym 20 feet away. And in reference to the child, you look at your best friend and you say, well, are you glad you did it or not? And your friend says, it was 10 times harder than I imagined it would be. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And it was 100 times more gratifying than I imagined it would be or could be. You feel the Jupiter-Saturn spirit in that? This is the evolutionary intention. There's things in life that are incredibly difficult, but totally rewarding and worth doing. So what is your unfolding great work in 2025 that will require the Saturnian grit and determination, but also faith and hope you can actually make the ascent of that mountain? And if you can, your reward is Jupiterian, that expansiveness, a stronger faith in yourself and your own abilities, as well as the wisdom gained through doing the difficult tasks. That's the more Saturn side. There's your pot of gold at the top of the mountain. So what is that for you? Well, this is where understanding where Saturn and Jupiter are currently transiting through your own personal chart. This is when your birth chart really comes in handy. But this is the generalized evolutionary intention here. And the recommendation is to look at your own chart, see where you have Pisces in your birth chart, as well as Jupiter and Gemini, and you'll see where these planets are transiting through, and it'll give you an idea of your unfolding great work that, yes, will require you to bring the best of who you are to accomplish that. But again, very, very rewarding. Now, the planet Saturn rules Capricorn, the same sign as the new moon. And new moons are about new beginnings. So here we have the event of new beginnings happening right at the end of 2024, but it's happening right before 2025. This is a perfect time for a New Year's resolution. And to really think big, it's like, okay, we're on the precipice of something major. The evolutionary question is, how can I do my own tiny sort of minuscule part amongst the collective, one of 8.2 billion people, do my own small part to climb that mountain, to radiate this more faith-based energy, this Jupiter energy, that very high level of consciousness, and radiate that out into the field around me, into the environment, which is infectious. It will have a positive effect in the hearts and minds of others around you. And it will also accelerate your growth and evolution in this upcoming year. So what is your New Year's resolution? Here, as we're at the end of December, the new moon is in Capricorn, also known as the sign of the hermit, ruled by Saturn, known as the Lord of the Solitude. Lord of Solitude in the sign of the mystic. These last couple days of this year is a perfect time for mountaintop time, to go within, to reflect, to contemplate about the next year for you. Because you're preparing early January to start off with a bang, because you have this maximized Mars-Pluto opposition, peak intensity, inviting us to not passively sit back in this sort of uneasy anticipation because we know something is looming rather large and that humanity is increasingly playing for higher and higher stakes. What is my role in this? So contemplate now, come the first of the year, put things into action. And ideally, these new goals you set for yourself are slightly ambitious, perhaps bring you up to the borders of your own comfort zones. That's the more Mars piece of this. As you inch your way towards your internal resistances with a capital R, as the great book, The War of Art, put it. I will say, next couple of weeks are going to be a bit noisy. There's going to be a lot of interference in the airwaves, so to speak. And this is part of the Mercury in Sagittarius, a part of what's called this T-square. I didn't mention this before. But at least for the first couple of weeks, Saturn, yes, it's square Jupiter, but also Mercury is a piece of this. Mercury is the communication planet. Here it is in the sign of beliefs and religion, Sagittarius, in a tension-based aspect and opposition with Jupiter, also related to beliefs because it rules Sag, in Mercury's sign of Gemini. So again, a lot of communication, a lot of verbal spats, especially with the intensity of the Mars opposite Pluto, a lot of rhetoric, a lot of hot button issues turning white hot. And this stuff can be quite distracting. And between these various ideologies winging themselves at each other, there's going to be some truth intermingled. And of course, aligning with the more truth side of things is beneficial. But you can really cut to the chase by just focusing on raising your own level of consciousness through whatever way you like. With Saturn and Pisces, I highly recommend daily meditation to help you do that. Because the more you raise your consciousness, the less vulnerable you are to be manipulated by information that is simply not true. When people are afraid, their consciousness is very easily manipulated and can be controlled, vulnerable to being controlled by other people. So for me personally, I'm just going to be kind of ignoring the noise, getting some mountaintop time, going within, visualizing the future I'd like to co-create. Think to myself, what are some long-term, let's say, structure and goals? There's Saturn. That we are building towards a more expansive future, Jupiter, that has a spiritual component in the sense that consciousness is key, Pisces, aiming more towards freedom, that's more Pluto and Aquarius, and the proliferation of more truthful ideas with a capital T. That's the more Gemini side of things. Because Gemini has this spirit of just the facts, ma'am. It's known as the archetype of the researcher and the journalist. And these facts, when we align with that truth from a higher level of consciousness, will liberate us from the darker potential of dystopian timelines into a more utopian, decentralized, and humanitarian future, the positive expression of the Aquarian age, where we can leverage technology for the health and well-being of ourselves, but also the planet. These are the core evolutionary intentions, with the goal being to expand our consciousness.